Welcome, everyone. This is the first podcast from Chapter 11. In this podcast, we will introduce basic signaling and communication between cells. There are four primary ways that we'll talk about: local signaling, and then one long distance pathway. And to begin with this topic, I want to show this short video here. Okay, we're going to begin with this video. And in this video, we'll see here's our friend the cheetah. And as we watch this video, I want you to think about how the different systems of the cheetah, its circulatory system, its heart processes, its brain, the activities within its brain, all the other things within its body, how does that happen? And then we'll see this little baby warthog running away and trying to flee for its life. And we got to think about what's happening with that warthog. How does the warthog know what to do? How does it work in this coordinated manner to escape the cheetah? And then we'll see the mom come and see what the mom does. And let's go ahead and watch just a little bit of this video. There goes the cheetah, slowly coming up and then full blast running. Baby warthog running for its life. Thinking of where it could hide. Now the mom's coming after the cheetah. Cheetah takes one to the side. Now the cheetah's looking for the baby still. All these systems are acting together. And for the time being, the cheetah leaves. Because the cheetah knows it's not much of a match for the full-grown warthog. The cheetah, by its nature, well, most of the attacking predatory cats are going after that easy kill. And the warthog, the adult warthog, is not an easy kill. And so it recognizes that. All right, so the purpose of showing this video is to show that the whole organism has to respond in some coordinated way. And the way it does this is we all go all the way down to the cell. And how does the cell communicate with itself and with its neighboring cells to make these very large physiological processes occur, such as hunting for the prey, hiding, waiting, chasing. Then the mother's instincts kick in to protect the baby, even though that the cheetah is so much bigger and stronger than it. All of these occur because of cellular signaling. Okay, the way that these cells communicate with each other and with neighboring cells can either be local or long distance. I'm going to write long distance first because we're going to talk about that in a little bit. So let's go and write that down. Cells communicate with each other using long distance mechanisms. We'll get to that in a moment. But what I want to focus on are these local signaling. And there are four different ways. The first is direct cell contact. And they can do this in several different ways, but we're going to focus on one way called gap junctions. So I'm going to draw maybe 4 or so cells here. And I mean for these cells to be kind of right next to each other. And in order to have a coordinated pathway, communication between these cells, let's say it's a muscle cell, like a heart cell, and we know that the heart has to bump in a very coordinated way. Well, if this cell gets the signal that it's supposed to contract or relax in a certain way, how do the other cells know to do the same thing? And they do that by connect. I should have drawn these two cells closer to each other. They're meant to be right next to each other. But there are these things called gap junctions. I'm going to draw it like so. I should have drawn it in a different color to highlight it, so I meant for this to be in blue. These are gap junctions. GAP and then junction. And they will communicate like so with neighboring cells. And this is the way that we get communication between these cells and allow the cells to work as a single unit. And these gap junctions, what they really do is they help connect the cytoplasms to each other. It doesn't mean free flowing between the cytoplasm occurs. It's a very small molecules that can go through something like a calcium ion. So let's write calcium here. For instance, organelles like mitochondria could not go through a gap junction. only small molecules. But that's enough to signal processes within these cells. And we see that this is really important in things like muscle contraction, like the heart. So I'm going to write heart contraction. I'll just write heart. So heart contraction, labor during childbirth, the muscle contraction that helps deliver the child. That has to be a coordinated function. I'm going to show this real quick video, just for about 30 seconds or so, to show you what's happening with the heart. I'm going to show a whole organ heart pumping, and then show you what's happening at the cellular level. So let's watch that now, and then we'll come back to it. Okay, so here's the video showing the heart beating. This is from an open heart surgery, so this is a living person right here. And we'll see the heart contracting in a very coordinated way. You can see how it's moving in a very rhythmic way. And we know our heart does this. But how does it do it? Well, as we said on the last slide, it does it by using gap junctions, so that the cells within the heart can send a signal from one cell to the next cell to the next cell. So now I want to show a quick video here looking at living cells and what they're doing. So let's take a peek here. So here, these are, I'm going to pause this for a moment. Okay, so these are individual cardiomyocytes, heart muscle cells. And you're going to see them contracting at the same time in unison. And how can they do this? Well, they do this by having those gap junctions connecting each of these heart cells, sending signals rapidly between them, allowing for this coordination, this unison coordination. So let's take a gander at this. See how they're all moving in a very coordinated way. I wish I could show a split screen between this and the heart as it's going, because I think that really kind of shows the cells moving in a coordinated way, just like the whole organ does. It happens at the cellular level first. Okay, that was direct-to-direct cell contact, and the example was a heart. Now let's look at this next example. Okay, this second one then is called cell-to-cell recognition, which is a little different, because in this one, there's no sharing of the cytoplasm. They're not directly connected in that way. They recognize each other, cell-to-cell recognition. So we may have over here, let's call this our immune cell. This is one of our own cells, an immune cell. And on the outside is what we call a receptor. And let's draw a receptor like this. A receptor is anything on in this particular example, when we're talking about cell-to-cell communication. It's on the outside of the cell. It's a protein. And it serves as a receptor because it will recognize things we call ligands. And so let's draw a ligand here on the other side. And this particular cell here, let's say let's draw the cell first, and we can give a couple examples of what it might be. And this particular cell here is going to have a ligand on it, like this. That's going to easily be recognizable by this immune cell. In fact, let me label this as immune cell. Okay, so this immune cell, as I said before, has a receptor. So let's go ahead and just write the word receptor so we don't forget what that is. This is right here, the protein on the outside of the cell. And now let's spend a little time talking about this here cell that has our ligand on it. This particular cell could be a cancer cell. It could be a bacterial cell. Now, if it were a bacterial cell, it would be much smaller than our human cell here. It could be viral, in which case it would even be smaller. Some kind of pathogen. Anything that needs to be destroyed by our immune system. Okay, and again, remember I called this here the ligand, so let's label that. Ligand. 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 All right, now what happens is, in this particular example of cell-to-cell recognition is that this ligand will now move into this receptor. And a very interesting thing will happen. As it hits this receptor, a cellular process within the immune cell will occur. and it will stimulate this immune cell. And let's say this is cancer. So this would be one of our natural killer cells in our system. You don't need to know that. I won't ask you that, but that's what it would be, a NTK cell. It would release these small little chemicals from the cell. It's like a frontal assault here upon this cell that needs to be destroyed. And it will cause this cell here, the cancer cell in this case, to die. It literally kills that cell. This is a term in the objective 4, but we might as well mention here. What will happen with this cell here is it will go under apoptosis. And let me just write that word here, apoptosis. Apoptosis just means a programmed cell death. So these little signals from our immune cell will now cause this cell to literally break up. So I'm going to just draw it like this. It just splits apart. And eventually what happens is it will be destroyed by other cells, eaten up by other cells. So that's usually what happens when a cancer cell forms. In fact, most cancer cells that enter the blood system are killed this way. It's just the relatively few that escape the immune system that can now cause problems. Okay, so this is cell-to-cell recognition. I'm going to take a break from here real quick, and we're going to show a quick video on how this immune cell, this natural killer cell, will kill one of these cancer cells. And then we'll come back and finish our list here. So in this video, you'll see this is our blood system, and here's one of our natural killer cells here. They float around in the blood system, and luckily they do, because they will look for cells that are not our cells, okay, or not healthy cells. So they'll look for bacteria, they'll look for viruses, they'll look for cancer cells that have escaped and that are trying to metastasize. So let's move up a little bit, and this is a good one to take a peek at here. So let's just watch this. So we'll see right here our natural killer cell and a foreign cell will bind to each other. The ligand from the cancer cell is binding to the receptor of our natural killer cell. And let's see what the natural killer cell does here. It's pretty cool. See how it's releasing from this natural killer cell here on the left, it's releasing all these chemicals to this cancer cell. Now it leaves to find another one. And see what happens here? It causes this cell to undergo apoptosis, that one word we introduced. And now that cell just slowly disintegrates, and this particular video doesn't show, but what happens is other cells will come along, macrophages, and eat those up. Now let's go back to the PowerPoint slide. Okay, let's talk about our third pathway. And this pathway is called paracrine signaling. And a good example of this is how our tissue is repaired. Say you're riding your bike and you fall off your bike and you cut your knee, right? It bleeds, and we know that our body has to do a few things. It has to release the immune system so that it can prevent any infection in that area, but it also has to repair that area and allow new cells to grow. One thing that can happen here is you may have a cell like this one. Let's call this our platelet cell. So there's our platelet cell. It's going to release something called growth factor. Tiny chemicals, not chemicals, protein factors that come out. They're called growth factors. And what they will do is they will stimulate nearby cells. Again, remember, this is still local. It's not going to go anywhere besides this local site of where your tissue has been damaged. They're going to stimulate other cells nearby, like these fibroblast cells. And these fibroblast cells will take up these growth factors. Let's write fibroblast. You won't need to know fibroblast on the exam. I'm just putting it here for completeness. These fibroblast cells will take up this growth factor, and they will grow faster, and they'll divide faster, all with the idea of fixing this damaged tissue with new cells. So these will then go on, and let's just write repair damage, because they're growing more and more cells to repair that damage. Repair damage. Okay, let's move on to our last one. And our last one is synaptic signaling. This is a very specialized one, and it involves neurons. So here we have our nerve cell. Nerve cells are really long cells. And in this case, we're going to call this one our presynaptic neuron. And then over here we have our target. And let's draw it like so. And this is either our postsynaptic or the target could be a muscle, but in this case just call it a postsynaptic one. This is how one neuron will communicate with the neighboring neuron to send a signal, say from your brain to your big toe, but able to do it in a very rapid, almost speed of light process. And the way it does this is that it will have signals made, say, in this presynaptic neuron. I'm just going to make little dots here. And then they are released out here in this cleft area. These little blue signals that I just drew, these would be called neurotransmitters. Neuro transmitters. Oh no, I'm out of room. Okay, neurotransmitters. They will then be taken up by this postsynaptic neuron because of very specific receptors, just like we saw in the other cells, very specific receptors on here that will bind to these neurotransmitters and bring them in here. And they will signal a cellular process to send to the next neuron, to the next neuron, to the next neuron, until it finally gets to that final place, say like the muscle in your foot to move your foot. I'm going to show just a real quick video on this as well, and then we'll come back and finish this podcast. So here's a really good example. Here we have our neuron. It has the processes coming out, and then it attaches to the next cell, next neuron here. And you're going to see the signal moving between one neuron to the next at these places where the presynaptic and the postsynaptic neuron interact and release these neurotransmitters. So let's just watch this for a moment. So that signal coming along here, boom, right there. In fact, let's pause right there. What we see here, right at this presynaptic, postsynaptic junction, we see this neurotransmitter leaving this neuron and moving to the next and signaling that signal. And it keeps doing this over and over again until it gets, say, from your, like I said in the podcast earlier, from your brain to your big toe, for instance. So here we have our pre and our post. It's releasing these neurotransmitters into this cleft. They're being picked up by these receptors over here, shown in what looks like a brownish color. Don't worry about what's going on in there. Here's our neurotransmitters. They bind to these receptors, just like so. And now it can be passed through. And it constantly sends these signals, just like so. Okay, let's go ahead and move to long distance signaling. And as the name implies, this is a process where some signal is produced in one part of the body and it needs to send it to all parts of the body. Okay, it's a long distance process. So let's go ahead and write long distance here. I'm going to draw a person here, and I know from past experiences that you're going to find my drawing abilities to be stellar. So here's our person. Oh my god, he's got a really, really long neck. Sorry about that, guy. All right. I'm going to do the best I can, but trust me, it will be horrible. Well, I'm sad to tell you this. This is probably the best one I've ever drawn, but it is really horrible. Really big foot there. Looks like a Flintstone almost, right? All right, well, anyhow, that's not important. Just trying to draw a body here, apparently without hands, so let's give him at least something here. Oh, that's so much better. So much better. Okay. Now, a good example of thinking about long-distance signaling is to think about the pancreas. The pancreas is a really excellent example. So let's draw a pancreas. Let's draw it right here. This will be our pancreas. We'll just draw pancreas over here in green so we can remember that's our pancreas, just in case you can't tell from the awesome drawing. Now the pancreas will produce some kinds of hormones. A really important one is called insulin. I'm going to write insulin under here. Insulin is really important in order to help bring sugar into cells, particularly cells that need the sugar, particularly say, well, any cell that needs a sugar, let's say. And so within our pancreas, I'm just going to draw a couple blue dots here. I think technically this is cyan. So let's make it. Now we need to get this to all of our body, all parts of the body, because all cells in our body needs glucose, so they all need this insulin. I'm going to draw a heart here, and I'm not going to draw it anatomically correct. I know that's probably shocking to you. So here's our heart. And the heart has these blood vessels, right? And these blood vessels, arteries are taking blood away from the heart. And I'm just going to draw it looking like it's going through this pancreas. And as it goes through the pancreas, it's going to pick up these insulin hormones. And let's just kind of draw, I'm not going to, let's see, I'll draw this blood vessel kind of going through all parts of our body, like so, down to our monstrous hands, down to our feet, up to our neck and head regions here. Also, it can deliver these hormones. And then when it gets to these cells that require the hormone, those cells will take up the hormone and it will have some kind of response, the desired response. And so this is a process. So let's do this as well. Let's draw our little insulin hormones in these vessels going throughout this lovely person's body here. So we call this long distance because the insulin is made in the pancreas, yet it goes throughout the entire body so that it can signal cells. It's still communicating with the cells, even though it's far away. Okay, next I want to show this video, and this video will show how this is happening, and its animation is almost as good as mine. So let's watch this real quick. Okay, so in this animation of the pancreas creating insulin, the hormone, and remember hormones are proteins made by the cells. It's released using the endocrine system and to take that hormone to other parts of the body. So let's watch this for a little bit. Here we have our pancreas. Within, don't worry about these terms. We're not going to ask that on the test. They're the specific cells, but you should know that insulin is being released into the bloodstream, just like shown here. And pretty soon we're going to see glucose. I think they showed it in green. There we go. Here's our glucose molecule, also in our circulatory system with our insulin. Okay, so now I'm going to pause this for a moment. What we see here is our insulin, when it gets to the target cells that need to take up the glucose. Glucose just can't go inside the cells. Glucose they require these transporters in order to get inside of the cell. And what happens is insulin binds to these receptors. When it binds to these receptors, it opens up these channels to bring in glucose. So let's watch this. I'm going to back it up a few seconds here. Okay. Insulin binds, glucose gets inside the cell. Insulin binds, glucose goes inside the cell. Constantly doing this in order to move in. Okay, we're not going to ask you anything on type 1 diabetes, but for those of you who might be interested in it, I'm sure you know somebody in your life that has this type 1 diabetes. So let me just explain to you what's happening here. And then we'll also show type 2. Again, this is just for your knowledge. We're not going to ask anything about diabetes. So here, remember, we're not making any insulin. And this is type 2, but let's ignore that for a moment. What happens with type 1 diabetes, since there's no insulin being made, you can never get glucose inside the cell. So when you see the sugar goes by, it just can't get it. Type 2 diabetes is a little different. Okay, what type 2 diabetes does, let's back up and show you that. That's pretty cool, this animation. What you're going to see here is insulin somebody who is type 2 diabetic, they still make insulin. In fact, there's nothing wrong with their insulin. Their insulin's just fine. But the cells become insensitive to the insulin. So when insulin binds to the receptors, it no longer opens up the channel. So let's watch this. Insulin binds, oh, channel doesn't open. Insulin binds, channel doesn't open. And so now these cells cannot get the sugar they need. Many drugs given to people with type 2 diabetes help modify this system so that the sugar can get in. Okay, well, that ends this podcast for Objective 1. If you have any questions about it, please let us know. If not, go ahead and watch podcast number 2, and then we'll see you in class.